What's up everybody, Troll here. Today we are going to talk about ASP.NET Core best practices using options design pattern. This is going to be a really interesting topic because we'll talk about different ways of configuration reading and we'll deal with some complex reading mechanisms, and also we'll try to understand what is the best option for us to read configuration information, and also we'll dive into details of configuration and learn a bit how many ways do we have when we deal with configuration. Okay, so I have simple application. This is just a built-in generated ASP.NET Core template. And using this template, I will try to dive into details of this topic. Let's get started. Okay, we have a simple application here, and of course, we have app settings to store information. When you need some sort of simple information, of course, you can store this information like this. For example, I want to deal with some additional service. Let's say it is my account service, and for my account service, I have some sort of private information. So I will deal with this issue like this: private read-only string URL. Okay, this is my URL. And let's type our localhost 9091 API, so it doesn't matter. Let's just store our another string information, which is going to be our username. This is my username, and also private read-only string password. And this is our password. So we have credentials. We are storing credentials directly in our controller. This is not a best practice. This is really bad practice, implementing configuration inside your controller. Why? Let me show you. When I build my application, I will get some sort of DLL, and I have special type of applications, third-party libraries to get the source code of my library, and one of them is going to be .pic. I really love this tool, so you can easily install it. So let's go to our folder, Control O, and best practices being debug. This is our folder. Let me just copy, open, file, open, and let's go to the folder, and from here let's open our DLL. And after DLL loaded, you will realize that we can easily see all the configuration. We type it directly inside our controller. So this is my controller, and you can use the low-level C# or high-level C#. It doesn't matter. So you see, we have credentials here, and here we have low-level C# view, and also even in a level of intermediate language, we are able to see this information. Let me show you. Let's open our developer command prompt, and let's zoom a little bit, type LDASM, and let's open our folder from here, file, open. Okay, let's go to the DLL. And here, let's just open our best practice part 1. Here we have controllers. In our controllers, we have the constructor mechanism, and in our constructor, so you see we have localhost information. This is our username, and this is our password. So you see we are able to see our credentials using different type of applications, and this is not secure way of implementing your configuration. But how to deal with this issue? Of course, we have app settings, and let's open our app settings, and in our app settings we are able to create our sections. Let me create our section. This is going to be our account service. Okay, and our account service requires some sort of URL information, our username information, and our password information. I'm just moving all these magic information to our configuration. This is my URL, this is our username, and of course this is our password. Let me just copy, paste it here. Great. Let's just remove this information from here, and now we should somehow read this information from the configuration. Of course, we have multiple ways. In programming, we always have multiple ways, but not all possible ways are best practices. Okay, in my case, I will show you one simple implementation of the configuration reading mechanism, and it is going to be our IConfiguration. This is our IConfiguration, and let's just use private read-only IConfiguration here. And I think the logging should be not before our configuration. And here we should the configuration, that configuration, great. And when we call our get, we are just calling our configuration, and from the configuration I'm calling the get section, and I'm just typing account service, and for my account service I'm getting my URL, for example. Okay, and let's get this URL, string URL, and you see we have these lines under this get section, so you can just use the var and it will automatically detect the exact type because it is nullable. Okay, and let's run our controller and see if we are able to get this information. So we have the development JSON. Okay, let's go to the development JSON. I think we have something wrong here, and yes, we just forgot the comma stuff. Let's run it again. And here we are. We should be able to see our URL. And here we are. Yes, this is our URL information. Every time you should just, instead of typing one by one the URL account information, we have another better ways of implementing this configuration stuff. But first, let's try to understand what's wrong with this IConfiguration. The problem here is my module right now, my controller is going to be my module, and IConfiguration is also another module for us because dependency injection instantiates this configuration, and this configuration is able to read configuration from different sources, etc. And we have two modules right now, and my module controller knows more information about another module. So it is something like this. This is our weather forecast controller, and this is our configuration controller, and more knowledge equal to more dependent mechanism. Okay, why? Because using IConfiguration, I am able to read not just a section of information I need for my controller. I am able to read the whole configuration, but I don't need to have access to the whole configuration. My controller will use only a tiny part of this configuration, and having such type of dependency like IConfiguration is not a good practice. It is a bad practice because you have more knowledge about other module right now. Okay, and in programming we have minimal information principle, and this principle says that your modules should have as least as possible information about each other, and this minimal information will help us to maintain our modules without depending each other, to extend them, to change them. And in this case, this is also not readable because I don't know what type of configuration I'm planning to read. The IConfiguration actually means I have configuration dependence, okay, but what part of configuration I need for my controller to run? This is a big problem, okay? And for that reason, it is not recommended to use IConfiguration. It is okay to use IConfiguration. You will be able to get any information you want, but right now, this is a bad practice because we have more knowledge about another module and we have more knowledge about our configuration, okay? Cool. And now let's try to somehow isolate our modules and try to understand how we can deal with this issue. I'm just going to remove my IConfiguration from here, and we will move our configuration reading mechanism from controller to the program CS. Right now, when you inject your IConfiguration, you have more information. This is one issue. Another issue is you are getting this configuration information, and you should provide some sort of configuration magic strings like this. This is also a mess, and in this case, we should have a clear configuration, and we should somehow isolate the configuration stuff and have as least communication with other modules. Okay, and let me just go to our program CS, and we are able to configure our configuration reading mechanism from the configuration, and we have really good mechanism here. I will use one of them. This is our builder services, and we have, for example, at singleton. Using singleton mechanism, you are able to inject your configuration. And to inject your configuration, you need first specify your configuration class. Okay, and let me just do it. Let's right click, add folder, and here I'm specifying my configurations. You can call it options, etc. And let's add our class, and this is our account service config or account service options. You can use it options. I'm just using account service config for now because we're just talking about right now the configuration. And for my account service configuration, let's check what we have. I should be able to get my account service informations, URL, username, password. Okay, and for that reason, I'm typing something like this: public string URL. Okay, this is get set public string username, and let's assign it to a string empty. This is good, and let's do it for our URL also. Okay, we have username and we have public string password. This is also string empty. Great. And we have only one missing information, and it is about account service. Every time I don't want to type account service information, let me show you first how to have this problem and then how to resolve it. Okay, and first let's go to our program CS at singleton, and from the singleton I am specifying that from the builder configuration get section. First let's create our lambda body. Okay, and this is my lambda body. This is our we need to specify our account service configuration. This is our account service configuration. First, we are instantiating our account service configuration as just an instance. And from the section, I should specify my key, and this is my account service key. And for the account service key, I should specify bind to account service config. And let's return our account service config. First, when we instantiate our account service config, we have empty values for our fields, and then we specify our account service section to get section. It means we are reading information from this section, and for this section we have 3 properties, and these properties will be mapped to account services properties, and we'll get the exact account service config. Let's just add breakpoint here, and let's run our application and see if we are able to get this data from the configuration. Okay, and let's see, let's continue. I guess it would be better first to inject this mechanism because we are not using this as an injected service. Okay, and let me go to the controller, and now I will have dependency from my exact account service config. So you see, we are not depending from my configuration, and we are depending from the exact tiny part of configuration, a named configuration called account service. And let's specify our account service here. Good. And this is my it's underline, of course. This is my account service, and let's run it. This should instantiate account service configuration with proper values. Okay, and our account service, so you see we have all these 3 property values. That's great. Now we are able to, let me just show you to the end. We are able to get this configuration information using account service config. We should be able to get it. Okay, and here we are. We have the exact part. Now we have a minimal information knowledge about other module. The other module is going to be our configuration. We are not dealing with whole configuration. We are dealing a tiny part of configuration. That's the really important part of not using a configuration interface directly in your controllers. Great. But in my program CS, I have this account service string magic string information. For that reason, I'm just going to my class and specify something like this: public static string account service, because to have all this stuff related to one functionality in one place is a good practice. So let me just simply read it from my config class, and that's all. Now we don't have magic strings everywhere, everything inside in our config. And when you need this magic string like account service, you will just refer to account service configs account service, and here we are able to read our configuration. This is one of the options to read your configuration information. Of course, we have multiple ways. I will show you the second version of reading configuration. For the reading configuration, we are able to use the get method, and for the get method you don't need such type of long code lines. I'm just going to use the get. Okay, get, and let's specify our class for instantiating, and let's remove this, and let's return this. That's simply it. So you see, I will specify the exact reading mechanism. Great. So from the section, we are getting account service config. It will do approximately the same stuff like we did for the bind, and it will just instantiate it automatically. You don't need to instantiate and specify it like in bind. Let's run it and see if everything is working. So you see, we have multiple ways of reading configuration. Of course, the bind and get is not the always the best options. I will show you another good options, even best options. So you see, we have this configuration stuff. That's good. You can use the bind get in your application, but for me, the better option is to use IOptions interface for your applications. Let me show you how we are dealing with this stuff. So in my case, in my controller, I have dependency from account service config. Instead of having account service config, I'm just changing it to IOptions. Okay, this is my options pattern to be used. The special interface called IOptions. Let's just use our extension. So you see, we have Microsoft extensions options, and when you specify IOptions, you don't have an exact instance of account config directly here. For getting the instance, you should specify dot, and from this dot, you see, right now we don't have this IOptions here. Also IOptions, you should specify dot value to get the instance. Dot value, this is our account service. Of course, I should change it to just config because I'm just injecting IOptions from here, and inside my controller I will not use IOptions but will use account service config instance. Okay, and to use this account service instance, let me just first run this application like this and see if we are able to get this data. And here we are. Let me just get the value information. So you see, we have empty information because we haven't configured our data to work with this IOptions. We need to specify another mechanism to read this configuration information. And for that reason, I'm specifying builder services.configure, and for the configure I'm specifying my account service config. Be careful in this case, having this X will not work. Okay, let's just remove it and let's just completely replace it something like this. Let me just copy it from here, cut and paste it here like this. Okay, and now I have a configuration get section without get, of course. Great. You see, I am able to specify something like this, and this is compiling, of course. And let's just check it. So you will realize sometimes when you start first to implement IOptions, you can get with some empty values because you shouldn't use the X here, the delegate mechanism here. And let's just simply run it and see if we are able to get our options information. Okay, and here we are. We are able to read our options information. Great. And this is the best practice of reading configuration information. First, you should specify special class, special model for reading data from your configuration. This is some sort of DTO reading information from the configuration to your application. This is a DTO model for your configuration, okay? And after that, you should specify your application to understand this model. And you are specifying that, okay, I have configuration information which I store in my account service section, and I want to read it in my application as account service config. Okay, and that's how we are configuring our IOptions mechanism. Of course, that's not all. We have a different ways of injecting configuration also. Right now, in my case, say I have some sort of changes after my application running, and I want to apply it to my configuration. Let's see how this IOptions will behave. I'm running my application, and you see we have the configuration. I want to change here the port for my URL. Let's continue, and everything is working. And I'm going to open my app settings at runtime, and of course, let's change it to 2. And let's just refresh again. And you will realize that this options doesn't allow us to read configuration after application running. If you have scoped service and you want to read the exact configuration for your scoped services and cache them, you can use another interface called IOptionsSnapshot. Okay, they have completely same behavior. So IOptionsSnapshot, you don't need to change the value stuff. I'm just going to run my application, and in my application in runtime, after reading the first configuration, I will do some changes. Let's first continue. It should read the first snapshot of my configuration, and let's go to change our port, and let's change it to 6. I'm just going to refresh again, and here we are. We have 6 here. So you see, if you want to change your configuration after application running, and if you want to have this reading mechanism in scoped service, and you want to cache it, you want your system to cache it per scoped service, you should use IOptionsSnapshot. But if you still want to read changed configuration, but you want to use singleton service, you should specify IOptionsMonitor here. And this IOptionsMonitor is a singleton, and of course it doesn't have value because it has the current value. Okay, this is same as your value. Let's run it again, and here we have the old port number. Let me just go and change it. Right now I'm changing it to 8. And let's refresh and see, and here we are able to read this information. So we have 2 interfaces. One of them is scoped, the other one is a singleton. For the singleton, you have IOptionsMonitor. For the scoped, you have IOptionsSnapshot you can use. And the last one here is to validate your configuration information. Sometimes someone can add some sort of invalid data to the configuration. Of course, storing your configuration in app settings is not always the best options. You can use Azure Key Vault or other type of mechanisms to store your configuration securely. But right now we are focusing just the configuration reading process, so we are using app settings. And for the app settings, I may have some sort of valid information right now. For example, in my password, I have a least password I have specified for my application, and it shouldn't work because I want to add some sort of validation over my configuration. And that's why I'm going to my account service config, and for the password, I'm going to specify string len. First, let's call our maximum len is 20. The minimum one is 20. Okay, 25, 20. Great. And I want my configuration to be validated when my application starts. Okay, so you can specify any sort of validation attributes here. For the simplest, I'm just using 1. And let me just go to my program CS and to make my application to understand this validation rule. Okay, for understanding this validation, you should specify another reading mechanism. This is going builder add options. Okay, for add options, I'm going to use account service config. And for the account service config, you see we have bind, and in my bind, I will specify builder configuration get section account service config account service, and we need a special library to validate our data, and this is our validate data annotations. Okay, this validate data annotations live in another library, so you should install Microsoft extensions options data annotations. And right now we have this data annotation. If you don't have this data annotation, just go to the Microsoft extensions options data annotations and install it. And after adding this validation, that should be okay. And let's go to use our options and the value. Let's run our application. Right now, system should validate our configuration, and we should get some sort of error. Okay. And here we are. We have options validation exception. Great. So to handle it, you just should specify try, and let's move it to the catch options validation exception, and you're just handling option validation exception. You can log it and do additional operation here. Okay, and let's just get this error information exp string error. Let me just get the error from the message, and let's run it. And here we are. So you see we have data annotation validation account service config for password. Great. And if you have more complex configuration mechanism, you should specify one more method for the program CS validate data annotation, and it is going to be our validate. Don't use validate for all type of operations. If you have possibility to validate data from the data annotations perspective, just do it. If you have more complex validation, you can rely on validate method. Okay, so the validate, I have my config object here. And for the config, I have, for example, some sort of rules like this. If URL len is less than 50, return false. Otherwise, return true. So in this case, you should specify true false mechanism because your delegate requires, so you see we have func delegate here, and this func delegate requires account service config and the Boolean response. And if you want to specify the error message, you should do it something like this: URL should be not less than 50 symbols. For example, okay, this is just a simple validation message. You can specify any sort of validation in your validate, of course, but as I mentioned, please prefer using the complex logics in your validate. Well, that's all. If you like my videos, please don't forget to subscribe, hit like button, share, and I will see you in the next tutorials.